Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly through one of history's most misunderstood doorways, a place wrapped in centuries of rumor, fantasy, whispered scandal, and impossible myths. Before you settle in, if you enjoy these slow journeys through forgotten history, you can gently leave a like, subscribe if you'd like to return for another peaceful adventure, and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights a little, settle into your favorite chair or beneath a warm blanket, let the sounds around you fade into the distance, and imagine that somewhere beyond the darkness, the waters of the Bosphorus ripple beneath the moon. The year is somewhere in the 16th century. Across the quiet water rises the silhouette of Topkapi Palace, home of the Ottoman Sultans. Countless windows catch the glow of oil lamps. Tall cypress trees stand almost motionless in the cool evening breeze. Marble courtyards shimmer faintly beneath moonlight, while somewhere inside the palace walls, distant footsteps echo across polished stone. Few places in history have inspired more exaggerated stories than the imperial harem. For hundreds of years, travelers who had never entered its gates claimed to know exactly what happened inside. Artists painted impossible scenes filled with endless luxury and idle pleasure. Writers invented conversations between women they had never met. Diplomats carried rumors back across Europe, where imagination eagerly filled every gap left by ignorance. The truth was quieter, far more complicated, and, in many ways, much sadder. Behind those guarded walls lived hundreds of women whose lives followed strict routines, endless lessons, rigid hierarchy, careful etiquette, and invisible political rules. Some hoped for unimaginable influence. Others spent decades without ever meeting the ruler whose household they officially belonged to. Many would never leave again. As darkness settles over the palace, servants extinguish lanterns along narrow passages. Somewhere a fountain trickles softly into a marble basin. Silk curtains move gently with the night air drifting through carved lattice windows. The palace itself almost seems asleep, though thousands of people continue their duties behind its walls. Nothing here happens by accident. Every corridor has a purpose, every doorway controls movement, every greeting quietly acknowledges status. The harem was not simply a residence. It was a carefully managed institution, almost a city hidden inside another city. Education, discipline, religion, family life, ceremony, diplomacy, and survival all unfolded within spaces that outsiders rarely witnessed. Imagine arriving here with no knowledge of the language, no family, no familiar face, only enormous gates slowly closing behind you. The sounds of the city disappear. Ahead stretches a world governed by customs you cannot yet understand. Someone gestures silently for you to follow. You step onto cool marble polished by generations before you. Your heartbeat seems louder than your footsteps. Around each corner waits another unknown room, another unfamiliar face, another unwritten rule that everyone else somehow already knows. Outside, Istanbul continues its ordinary rhythms. Merchants bargain in crowded markets. Ships arrive from distant ports carrying spices, silk, timber, and stories from 3 continents. The empire stretches across mountains, deserts, islands, forests, and fertile plains, yet inside these walls, time seems to move differently. The lives unfolding here rarely appear in official chronicles. Instead, they survive through scattered letters, careful court records, travelers' observations, forgotten memoirs, and quiet architectural clues left behind in stone. Over the coming hours, we'll leave behind the legends and patiently uncover the everyday reality hidden beneath them. following the women, servants, guardians, mothers, rivals, teachers, and children whose lives shaped an empire from behind carefully guarded doors. Because sometimes the greatest mysteries are not hidden by darkness, but by centuries of misunderstanding. Morning arrives quietly over the Bosphorus, washing the palace rooftops with pale gold long before the city below fully awakens. The distant call to prayer drifts across the water, lingering between the domes and slender minarets before dissolving into the cool air. As the last echoes fade, the enormous palace begins another carefully choreographed day. From the outside, Topkapi Palace appears less like a single grand building and more like a collection of peaceful courtyards, elegant pavilions, shaded gardens, and winding passages spread across a hill overlooking the sea. To a visitor standing beyond its gates, it might seem almost tranquil, a royal residence wrapped in silence. But inside, every stone belongs to an invisible system. Thousands of people live and work here. Scribes sharpen reed pens before sunrise. Gardeners trim fragrant roses that line shaded walkways. Palace cooks light vast kitchens where copper cauldrons slowly warm over charcoal fires. Stable hands brush magnificent horses while messengers prepare to carry imperial orders across 3 continents. Each person knows precisely where they may walk, and where they may never go. You find yourself crossing the first court, the broadest and most public space of the palace. Tall plane trees cast shifting shadows over worn stone paths. Soldiers stand quietly at their posts, scarcely moving except to acknowledge passing officials. The air smells faintly of damp earth, wood smoke, and the salty breeze drifting inland from the Bosphorus. Ahead rises another gateway, the Gate of Salutation. Crossing beneath it changes everything. The noise of ordinary activity fades behind thick walls, replaced by softer footsteps and quieter voices. Here begins the administrative heart of the Ottoman Empire, where grand viziers discuss taxation, military campaigns, diplomacy, and law beneath painted ceilings and graceful domes. Yet even this powerful place is not the palace's greatest secret. Beyond another series of guarded entrances lies the imperial harem. It is not visible from the main courtyards. You cannot accidentally wander inside. Every passage leading toward it narrows deliberately, bending around corners that reveal nothing until the final moment. Architecture itself becomes a guardian, guiding movement while concealing what lies beyond. As you approach, marble gives way to richly decorated corridors lined with colorful Iznik tiles. Deep blues, soft greens, and delicate crimson flowers bloom across glazed ceramic surfaces, catching gentle light filtering through high windows. Intricate Arabic calligraphy flows across archways like quiet streams of ink, reminding everyone that faith accompanies power at every step. The palace feels strangely alive. Doors open almost silently, servants glide past carrying folded linens, polished brass lamps, baskets of fresh bread, and delicate porcelain bowls. No one hurries, yet nothing seems delayed. Every movement follows rhythms refined across generations. Water is everywhere. Small fountains murmur continuously in hidden courtyards. Their gentle sound masks nearby conversations, offering privacy without anyone needing to whisper. Even the architecture understands discretion. Occasionally, sunlight spills into an open courtyard where orange trees perfume the warm air. Bright tulips sway gently beside carefully clipped shrubs. Songbirds settle briefly among branches before disappearing into the gardens again. Beauty here serves more than comfort. It reminds every resident that the Sultan's household reflects the greatness of the empire itself, yet beneath that elegance exists constant awareness. Certain staircases belong only to senior officials, certain chambers welcome only members of the ruling family, some doors remain closed to nearly everyone. A newcomer quickly learns that curiosity is dangerous. Questions asked too freely may earn only patient silence. Knowledge is shared carefully, piece by piece, according to one's place within the palace. The deeper you travel, the more intimate the spaces become. Windows grow smaller, hallways curve unexpectedly, private apartments replace ceremonial halls. The scent of rosewater lingers in the air, mixed with beeswax candles and polished cedar wood. Cushions embroidered with gold thread rest neatly beneath carved lattice windows, while thick carpets soften every footstep until the palace seems to breathe in silence, and then, almost without realizing it, you reach the threshold of the imperial harem itself. No dramatic announcement marks the moment, no music plays, only another carved wooden door, another respectful bow from a waiting servant, and the quiet understanding that everything beyond this point belongs to a world with its own customs, its own rules, and its own hidden rhythms. Outside these walls, emperors commanded armies and reshaped continents. Inside them, another kind of power waited patiently, concealed behind marble, silk, and carefully guarded doors. The carved wooden door closes gently behind you, not with a heavy thud, nor with the sharp sound that stories often imagine, but with a quiet click that seems almost ordinary. Ahead stretches another hallway washed in soft morning light. Marble floors remain cool beneath careful footsteps, while the distant murmur of a fountain follows you from one courtyard to the next. This is the place that generations of outsiders transformed into fantasy. Yet the reality begins with something surprisingly simple. The harem was a household. The word itself comes from the Arabic root harem, meaning a protected or forbidden place, a private space reserved for family rather than strangers. In the Ottoman Empire, the imperial harem was not created to entertain visitors or inspire legends. It existed because the Sultan's family, household, servants, and attendants required a carefully organized world of their own. It was, in many ways, an entire neighborhood hidden inside the palace. At its height, several hundred women lived here, though the exact number changed over time. Alongside them worked tutors, physicians, musicians, seamstresses, laundresses, cooks, elderly caretakers, and countless servants whose names rarely appeared in official records. Children laughed in shaded courtyards. Elderly women quietly recited prayers beside open windows. Lessons began each morning almost as regularly as the rising sun. Far from endless leisure, daily life followed a disciplined schedule. As daylight fills the chambers, young women carefully roll away sleeping mats before folding blankets with practiced precision. Floors are swept. Brass lamps are polished until they catch the light like still water. Fresh bread arrives from palace kitchens, accompanied by olives, cheese, figs, and warm bowls of fragrant soup. Conversation remains gentle. Even laughter is measured. Everyone understands that hundreds of lives must fit together within limited space. You notice that the architecture encourages order. Narrow passages suddenly open into peaceful courtyards where fountains cool the summer air. Upper galleries overlook inner gardens without exposing private rooms to the outside world. Delicate wooden screens allow fresh breezes to pass while protecting the privacy expected within the household. Every design choice serves both beauty and purpose. Many Europeans imagined the harem as a place devoted entirely to romance. In truth, romance occupied only a tiny corner of its existence. Most women living here would spend years studying without ever entering the Sultan's private household. Many would never meet him at all. Their days were shaped not by luxury alone, but by education, etiquette, religious instruction, music, embroidery, reading, household management, and service within the palace community. For some, the harem eventually became home for decades. Others would leave through carefully arranged marriages to trusted officials of the empire. Such marriages strengthened political loyalty while providing respected futures beyond the palace walls. A woman who departed in this way often carried with her excellent education, refined manners, valuable connections, and considerable prestige. The harem was constantly changing, new arrivals entered, children were born, young women graduated into new responsibilities, elderly attendants quietly disappeared from daily routines as the years passed. Life moved forward with remarkable steadiness. Walk beside one of the inner gardens for a moment. Birdsong drifts from orange trees heavy with fruit. Bees wander lazily among flowering herbs planted beside marble walkways. Nearby, several girls practice elegant handwriting under the patient eye of an older instructor. Each careful stroke of ink reflects hours of concentration rather than artistic talent alone. Beautiful writing is considered evidence of discipline. Elsewhere, another lesson unfolds. A music teacher gently adjusts a student's fingers across the strings of an oud. Notes rise softly beneath the vaulted ceiling before fading into the distant sound of flowing water. Nobody applauds. Improvement happens quietly, one small correction after another. Even clothing reflects structure rather than extravagance. Fine fabrics certainly exist, but garments also communicate rank, duty, and occasion. Colors, embroidery, and jewelry often reveal a woman's position long before anyone speaks her name. The harem is, above all else, an institution. Its purpose reaches beyond comfort. It preserves the Sultan's household, educates future mothers of princes, maintains court traditions, protects dynastic stability, and quietly supports the machinery of an empire stretching across continents. The legends rarely mention any of this. They prefer dramatic secrets. Reality, however, has its own quieter fascination, because behind every embroidered curtain, every polished courtyard, and every carefully guarded doorway, ordinary human lives unfolded within extraordinary surroundings, shaped less by fantasy than by discipline, patience, and the slow passage of time. And as your eyes adjust to this hidden world, the women who truly held influence within it begin to emerge from the silence. The gentle notes of the oud fade into silence. For a brief moment, the only sound is the steady splash of water falling into a marble basin somewhere beyond the walls. The young women return to their lessons, their instructors quietly correcting posture, handwriting, or pronunciation. Life inside the harem continues with its familiar rhythm, yet above all these daily routines stands a single figure whose presence shapes nearly every corner of this hidden world. She is not the Sultan's wife, she is not chosen for beauty, she rarely needs to raise her voice. She is the Valide Sultan, the mother of the reigning Sultan, and often the most influential woman in the entire Ottoman Empire. To understand the harem, you must first understand her. Long before dawn, while much of the palace still sleeps beneath the fading stars, a small group of attendants quietly enters her private apartments. Heavy curtains are drawn back to welcome the first pale light. Brass lamps are extinguished one by one. The fragrance of rosewater lingers in the air, mixed with cedar wood and beeswax polished into every carved cabinet. Nothing inside these chambers feels excessive, everything reflects dignity, the furnishings are elegant but restrained. Cushions embroidered with delicate floral patterns rest beside low tables holding carefully arranged letters, sealed documents, and prayer books worn smooth through years of use. Every object has its place. The Valide Sultan begins her day not with ceremony, but with order. While the empire's ministers prepare reports for the Sultan, trusted servants quietly deliver updates to his mother as well. News arrives from every corner of the palace. Supplies requested by the kitchens. Progress in the education of younger women. Arrangements for ceremonies. Requests from senior attendants. Small disagreements requiring quiet judgment before they become larger problems. The harem is far too large to govern through emotion alone. It requires patience, memory, discipline, experience. As you follow one of the attendants through a softly lit corridor, you notice how people respond whenever the Valide Sultan approaches. Conversations pause naturally. Heads bow with practiced respect. Doors open before she reaches them. No hurried commands are necessary. Her authority is already understood. Years have taught her every hidden current flowing beneath palace life. She knows which young women show exceptional promise. She remembers the family histories of senior attendants. She notices changing friendships, growing rivalries, and quiet ambitions long before anyone speaks them aloud. Power here rarely announces itself. It observes, it listens, it waits. In many European stories, the harem was imagined as a place where the Sultan controlled everything personally. Reality was far more practical. The Sultan governed an empire stretching across 3 continents. Campaigns, diplomacy, finance, justice, and religion demanded his attention every day. He could not supervise the countless details of palace life. His mother often did. Within the harem, her word carried enormous weight. She approved appointments, managed household expenses, oversaw education, welcomed honored guests, arranged charitable works, and helped preserve the careful balance upon which palace stability depended. Sometimes her influence extended far beyond these walls. Foreign ambassadors occasionally sought her goodwill through carefully chosen gifts. Wealthy foundations supporting schools, hospitals, fountains, and mosques bore her patronage. Across Istanbul, ordinary people drank from public fountains she had commissioned without ever seeing the woman responsible for them. Her presence reached beyond marble corridors into the daily lives of the empire itself. Yet authority also carried loneliness. Imagine standing beside one of the upper windows overlooking the palace gardens. Below, children laugh while chasing one another beneath cypress trees. Servants cross shaded courtyards carrying baskets of fresh fruit. The Bosphorus glitters peacefully in the afternoon sun. The Valide Sultan watches quietly. She has witnessed princes grow into rulers. She has survived political storms that removed powerful men almost overnight. She understands better than anyone that today's security may become tomorrow's uncertainty. Every decision must protect not only her son, but the dynasty itself. A careless appointment, an overlooked rivalry, an impulsive favor. Any of these might ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. Even her kindness requires caution. When evening settles across Topkapi Palace, attendants light rows of oil lamps that cast warm reflections across polished marble floors. The day's petitions have been answered. Lessons have ended. The younger women return to their chambers, speaking softly as shadows lengthen across the courtyards. High above them, behind carved lattice windows, the Valide Sultan remains awake a little longer. Letters still wait upon her table. Tomorrow's decisions have already begun to gather, and somewhere within the quiet household she governs, new faces are preparing to enter a journey that will begin not with privilege, but with separation from everything they have ever known. Night settles softly over the palace, the last oil lamps flicker beneath carved archways, and the corridors grow quieter with every passing hour. Somewhere behind closed doors, the Valide Sultan finishes reading the day's final report before setting it carefully aside. Outside, waves lap gently against the palace walls where the Bosphorus meets the shore. Beyond those waters, however, another journey is already beginning. For every woman living inside the imperial harem, there was once a day when everything familiar disappeared behind her. Contrary to many popular stories, there was no single path into the harem. Some girls arrived after being purchased through the legal slave markets that operated across parts of the Ottoman world. Others were presented as diplomatic gifts by regional rulers seeking favor with the Sultan. A few entered through palace patronage or family connections. Many came from the Caucasus, particularly Circassian, Georgian, and Abkhaz communities, while others arrived from the Balkans, the Black Sea region, or elsewhere within the vast reach of the Ottoman Empire. Each arrival carried her own language, her own memories, her own fears. Imagine standing aboard a quiet vessel crossing the Bosphorus at first light. The sea is calm, disturbed only by the steady rhythm of wooden oars. Seagulls circle overhead, their cries fading into the cool morning air. Ahead, Topkapi Palace rises above the shoreline, its domes and gardens glowing beneath the pale colors of dawn. A young girl watches silently. She cannot yet understand the conversations unfolding around her. The city seems impossibly large. Minarets pierce the morning sky. Merchant ships crowd the harbor. Smoke rises gently from hundreds of chimneys as Istanbul awakens to another ordinary day. Though nothing about this morning feels ordinary to her, she carries very little. Perhaps a small piece of embroidered cloth sewn by her mother, perhaps a simple bracelet from home. Perhaps only memories that grow heavier with every stroke of the oars. Upon reaching the palace, new arrivals do not immediately become members of the Sultan's inner household. Instead, they begin as students. Senior women receive them quietly, recording names, estimated ages, languages, and places of origin. In many cases, new Ottoman names are given, marking the beginning of an entirely different identity within palace life. It is not meant to erase the past completely, but it does signal that the future will follow different rules. The first days are often the hardest. Everything sounds unfamiliar. The call to prayer echoes across the courtyards in a language some have never heard before. Meals are served according to customs they do not yet recognize. Even the graceful gestures of greeting require careful observation before they can be repeated correctly. Fortunately, very few newcomers face these changes entirely alone. Older attendants remember their own first days. With patient voices, they explain where to stand, how to bow, when to speak, and when silence is expected. They demonstrate how garments are folded, how meals are shared, and how respect is shown to women of higher rank. Learning begins almost immediately, not because anyone expects perfection, but because palace life depends upon order. As weeks pass, unfamiliar routines slowly become ordinary. Morning prayers, lessons in the Ottoman Turkish language, reading and writing, religious instruction, embroidery, music, household etiquette, graceful movement through crowded corridors. Every skill serves a purpose. Some young women adapt quickly, their confidence growing with each passing season. Others struggle quietly, homesickness arriving unexpectedly during peaceful moments, a familiar melody, the scent of fresh bread, or the sight of birds flying freely beyond the palace gardens reminding them of places they may never see again. There are tears, there is loneliness, but there are also friendships. Girls from distant corners of the empire begin teaching one another forgotten words from childhood. They exchange stories about snowy mountains, green valleys, fishing villages, and family celebrations. Though separated by language, they discover that uncertainty feels remarkably similar no matter where one is born. Gradually, strangers become companions, companions become sisters in circumstance. Years later, many will scarcely remember the frightened child who first crossed the palace gates. Discipline reshapes daily habits, education expands their understanding of the world, confidence replaces hesitation, yet deep within memory, the journey across the water never entirely disappears. The quiet crossing, the unfamiliar skyline, the moment when one life gently faded as another quietly began. And as those first uncertain steps settle into routine, the true work of the imperial harem finally begins, not in luxury or celebration, but in years of careful education that will shape every future waiting behind these walls. The memories of distant homes begin to soften, not because they are forgotten, but because each new day inside the imperial harem leaves less room for uncertainty. The frightened newcomers who once hesitated before every unfamiliar doorway now wake before sunrise almost without thinking. Their hands know where to fold their blankets. Their feet remember which corridors lead to the classrooms. Their voices have grown steadier, even if they still carry traces of distant accents. Outside, Istanbul stirs beneath a pale morning sky. Inside the harem, another lesson is about to begin. A small bronze bell sounds gently through the corridors. Doors open one after another. Young women gather quietly in neat rows. Their embroidered robes simple but carefully maintained. Hair is tied neatly beneath fine scarves, hands folded respectfully as instructors arrive without ceremony. No one rushes. There is no need. Every hour of the day has already been planned. The imperial harem is often remembered for its beauty. It should also be remembered as a school. Education is not an occasional pastime here, it is the foundation of daily life. Whether a young woman would one day serve in the palace, marry an important official, or rise to the highest ranks of the household, she was expected to learn discipline before privilege. The first lesson begins with language. Many of the newcomers arrived speaking Circassian, Georgian, Greek, Albanian, Bosnian, or other regional languages. Now they practice Ottoman Turkish together, repeating phrases softly after an elderly instructor whose patience seems endless. Mistakes are corrected gently. Progress comes one sentence at a time. The room smells faintly of ink, polished wood, and warm beeswax. Sunlight filters through carved lattice windows, casting delicate patterns across woven carpets where low desks hold reed pens, parchment, and small ceramic ink pots. Beautiful handwriting is admired, but precision matters even more than elegance. Each carefully formed letter reflects self-control. After language comes religion. A respected teacher explains passages from the Quran with calm clarity, encouraging understanding rather than hurried memorization. The atmosphere remains peaceful. Questions are welcomed when asked respectfully, and older students quietly assist younger ones who struggle with unfamiliar words. As the morning passes, the palace slowly fills with different sounds, the gentle scratching of pens, soft voices reading aloud, pages turning. Somewhere beyond the classroom, the distant splash of a courtyard fountain continues without interruption. When lessons pause, the young women move to another chamber where music waits. An instructor lifts an oud from its embroidered cloth covering and demonstrates a simple melody. Others practice the canon or the ney flute, their first notes uncertain before gradually finding harmony. Music is valued not merely as entertainment, but as refinement, a way of cultivating patience, attentiveness, and emotional balance. Nearby, another class studies embroidery. Fine silk threads pass carefully through linen stretched across wooden frames. Floral designs slowly emerge beneath steady hands. No one speaks loudly. Needles move with quiet rhythm while experienced women offer small corrections that are almost whispers. Elsewhere, practical education continues. Household management is taught with equal seriousness. How should honored guests be received? How are ceremonial garments stored? Which perfumes are appropriate for different occasions? How is correspondence delivered with proper etiquette? These details may appear small, yet within the palace they carry great importance. Grace is measured not through grand gestures, but through hundreds of thoughtful habits practiced every day. The instructors rarely praise anyone too quickly. Excellence is expected to grow slowly. One afternoon, you notice a young student struggling to balance a delicate porcelain tray filled with tiny coffee cups. Her hands tremble ever so slightly, and one cup tilts dangerously before an older attendant gently steadies it without a word. No scolding follows, only another opportunity to practice, again and again. Weeks become months, months become years. The awkward child who once feared speaking aloud gradually becomes a confident young woman capable of managing complex responsibilities with calm assurance. Her handwriting grows elegant. Her posture straightens naturally. She moves through the palace with quiet confidence, no longer watching every step. Friendships deepen during these shared lessons. Older students encourage younger arrivals. Teachers become trusted guides. Knowledge passes gently from one generation to the next, preserving traditions that have endured for centuries. By the time evening shadows stretch across the marble courtyards, another day of learning has come to an end. Lamps are lit. Books are carefully closed. Instruments are wrapped in protective cloth, and embroidery frames are placed neatly against the walls. Education inside the imperial harem never truly ends. Each lesson prepares the women not simply for tomorrow's tasks, but for their place within a world where every gesture carries meaning, every relationship has its place, and every person must understand exactly where they belong. Soon, those carefully learned distinctions will shape the invisible ladder that governs every life within these walls. Even after the lessons end, the learning does not, as the last embroidery frame is carefully stored away and the final notes of the oud fade into the evening air. The women of the imperial harem rise together. Cushions are returned to their places. Lamps are trimmed. Doors are quietly closed behind each classroom. Nothing appears hurried, yet no movement is random. By now, you may have noticed that everyone seems to know exactly where to stand, whom to greet first, when to speak, and when silence carries more wisdom than conversation. That understanding comes from something more powerful than habit. It comes from hierarchy. The imperial harem is not simply a collection of rooms filled with women. It is an intricate society, where every resident occupies a carefully defined place. Rank shapes daily life as surely as the palace walls themselves. You begin to notice it in the smallest details. Two young attendants walk down a tiled corridor together. As an older woman approaches, they immediately step aside, lowering their eyes respectfully. No command is given. No reminder is necessary. The gesture has been practiced so many times that it feels as natural as breathing. Respect here is not performed for appearances, it is woven into everyday life. The newest arrivals stand at the very beginning of this invisible ladder. They perform the simplest duties while continuing their education. They observe far more than they speak. Their days are filled with lessons, small responsibilities, and constant learning. Every action quietly contributes to their reputation. Above them are women who have proven themselves through years of discipline. Some oversee household tasks, others supervise education. Some are entrusted with managing clothing, ceremonial objects, or valuable furnishings. A few serve as personal attendants to women of higher rank, positions earned through reliability rather than favor alone. With each step upward, responsibility grows, so does expectation. The atmosphere inside the palace reflects this delicate balance. In one courtyard, younger women carefully water flowering plants while an experienced supervisor watches without interruption. She notices uneven work long before anyone else does. A gentle nod of approval is rare, but deeply valued when it comes. Further along the corridor, another senior attendant quietly settles a disagreement before voices can rise. She speaks calmly, almost softly, and within moments the tension disappears as though it had never existed. Authority often whispers, it seldom needs to shout. At the summit of this carefully ordered world stand the women closest to the Sultan's family. Those entrusted with serving the Valide Sultan hold enormous prestige. Their judgment is respected throughout the household. Years of loyalty have earned them influence that newcomers can scarcely imagine. Above nearly everyone stands the Valide Sultan herself, whose decisions ripple through every chamber of the harem. Yet even she observes traditions older than her own lifetime. No one exists entirely outside the structure. The hierarchy governs ceremonies as well. Imagine entering one of the larger reception halls during a formal celebration. Rich carpets cover the marble floor. Oil lamps cast warm light across painted ceilings. The women enter one by one, not randomly, but according to rank. Each knows precisely where she belongs. No written signs mark their places. Memory alone guides them. The order feels almost effortless. Meals follow similar customs. Senior women are served first. Conversations begin only after proper greetings have been exchanged. Even the placement of cushions reflects invisible rules understood by everyone present. To an outsider, these customs might seem unnecessarily complicated. To those who live here, they create stability. In a household containing hundreds of people, clear expectations prevent confusion. The hierarchy also shapes ambition. Every young woman understands that advancement is possible, but never guaranteed. Skill matters. Patience matters. Character matters. A careless mistake remembered by the wrong person may delay progress for years. Quiet consistency earns greater rewards than dramatic displays. One afternoon, you notice a young attendant returning a small gold hairpin she has found lying unnoticed beside a fountain. No one had seen her pick it up. She could easily have hidden it. Instead, she places it carefully into the hands of a senior supervisor before bowing respectfully and returning to her duties. The exchange lasts only seconds. No public praise follows, yet word travels quietly through the household. Trust, like rank, is built one small choice at a time. As the seasons pass, women rise gradually through this invisible ladder. Some remain near its beginning, others climb steadily through years of faithful service. A fortunate few eventually reach positions where their voices carry genuine influence. But every step depends upon understanding the unwritten rules that shape life inside these walls, because in the imperial harem, power is rarely measured by how loudly one speaks, it is revealed by how many doors open before one even needs to knock. Morning returns almost unnoticed. The palace does not awaken with sudden noise or hurried footsteps. Instead, life unfolds gradually, like the first rays of sunlight creeping across the marble courtyards. A fountain has been flowing through the night without pause, and its gentle rhythm now mingles with birdsong drifting down from the cypress trees. For the women of the imperial harem, another ordinary day has begun. History often remembers great ceremonies, political intrigue, and powerful rulers, yet most lives are not lived in extraordinary moments, they are shaped by ordinary mornings. A faint knock echoes through a quiet corridor as attendants move from chamber to chamber, softly announcing the beginning of the day. One by one, woven curtains are drawn aside, allowing cool air to drift through carved lattice windows. The first light of dawn paints delicate patterns across embroidered cushions and polished wooden chests. The women rise without complaint. Some whisper brief morning prayers, others smooth the creases from neatly folded garments before carefully dressing for the day ahead. Fine fabrics rustle softly in the stillness, while silver basins filled with fresh water wait for washing. Nothing feels rushed. The rhythm has been practiced so many times that it seems almost effortless. Soon the corridors begin to fill with quiet movement. Groups of young women cross the palace carrying folded linens, baskets of fresh bread, bundles of herbs, or polished copper vessels. Experienced attendants exchange gentle greetings before continuing toward their assigned duties. The aroma of warm flatbread drifts from the palace kitchens, accompanied by the comforting scent of honey, olives, ripe figs, soft cheeses, and freshly brewed herbal infusions. Breakfast is simple but nourishing, shared without unnecessary conversation. Meals are moments of calm rather than celebration. Afterward, the household gradually divides into countless small routines. Some women continue their lessons, others repair delicate garments whose embroidered threads have loosened with use. Skilled seamstresses sit beside open windows where natural light helps them distinguish tiny shades of silk thread. Every stitch is placed with remarkable patience. Elsewhere, the palace laundresses work quietly in shaded courtyards. Fresh water splashes gently against smooth stone basins as linens are washed, rinsed, and carefully hung to dry beneath the morning sun. White fabrics sway lightly in the breeze, filling the gardens with slow, graceful movement. Nearby, several women tend the flowers. Tulips, roses, jasmine, and fragrant herbs receive careful attention throughout the changing seasons. Gardens inside the harem are more than decoration. They offer moments of peace, places where the mind can rest after hours of study and responsibility. A young attendant pauses briefly beside a blooming rose. She closes her eyes for only a moment, breathing in its delicate fragrance before quietly returning to work. No one interrupts her. Small moments of stillness belong to everyone. By midday, sunlight warms the marble walls, shadows shorten beneath elegant archways. In one shaded courtyard, elderly women gather together, their hands occupied with spinning thread while they exchange gentle stories from years long past. Their laughter is soft, never loud enough to disturb the peaceful atmosphere. Children wander nearby under careful supervision. Tiny footsteps echo across polished stone as young princes and princesses chase one another around fountains, occasionally stopping to watch colorful birds bathing in shallow pools. Their world still feels wonderfully simple, untouched by the responsibilities waiting beyond childhood. the afternoon brings quieter work, books are copied, jewelry is repaired, letters are delivered discreetly between trusted attendants. A physician visits an elderly resident whose aching joints have become more troublesome with age, preparing herbal remedies whose recipes have passed through generations. Life here contains constant activity, but very little spectacle. As evening approaches, the pace slows once again. Oil lamps are lit one after another, their warm glow replacing the fading daylight. Long shadows stretch across tiled corridors while the scent of burning amber and sandalwood gently fills the air. Some women gather for quiet conversation, others continue reading by lamplight, a few simply sit beside the fountains, listening to water flowing over smooth marble as the stars slowly appear above the palace roofs. From beyond the high walls comes the distant sound of Istanbul settling into night. Merchants close their shops, fishing boats return to the harbor. Somewhere across the Bosphorus, another call to prayer drifts through the darkness. Inside the harem, however, life remains enclosed within its own gentle rhythm, a world where ordinary days, repeated hundreds of times across many years, quietly shape extraordinary lives. And hidden among these peaceful routines are silent guardians whose watch never truly ends, even while the rest of the palace sleeps. The lamps continue to glow long after the palace grows quiet. Beyond the marble courtyards, the city slowly drifts toward sleep. The last merchant boats disappear into the darkness of the Bosphorus, and a cool breeze stirs the cypress branches above Topkapi Palace. Within the imperial harem, doors are gently fastened for the night, footsteps become fewer, and whispered conversations fade behind carved wooden screens. Yet one group remains fully awake. Their watch has only just begun. As you walk through the dimly lit corridors, you notice figures standing silently at doorways and intersections. They wear finely kept robes, carry themselves with remarkable discipline, and rarely speak unless duty requires it. Their eyes observe every movement, every visitor, every unopened door. These are the eunuchs, the guardians of the imperial harem. Few people in Ottoman history have been surrounded by more misunderstanding. To many outside the empire, they became mysterious figures, almost mythical in reputation. Travelers exaggerated their authority or imagined them as little more than silent jailers. The truth, as so often happens, was more complicated and far more human. Most of the senior guardians of the imperial harem were black eunuchs, many brought to the empire through the East African slave trade as boys before being placed into palace service. It is one of the more difficult realities of Ottoman history, reminding us that the splendor of imperial courts often rested upon systems of coercion and enslavement. Through years of education, discipline, and loyalty, some rose to positions of extraordinary responsibility within the palace. Their lives were shaped by service, their futures depended upon trust. The most important among them was the chief black eunuch, known as the Kisler Agassi. His responsibilities reached far beyond guarding doors. Before sunrise, while much of the palace still sleeps, he is already reviewing the day's arrangements. Messages requiring careful delivery pass through his hands. Visitors requesting permission to enter certain sections of the palace wait for his approval. Supplies destined for the harem are checked with quiet precision. Nothing enters carelessly, nothing leaves unnoticed. As dawn brightens the tiled corridors, the palace slowly begins another day. Young attendants carry baskets of bread toward the kitchens. Teachers gather their books before lessons begin. Senior women move calmly between apartments. Throughout it all, the eunuchs remain present without drawing attention to themselves. They open heavy doors, escort visitors through approved routes, ensure that privacy is respected at every moment. Most conversations with them are brief, a respectful greeting, a simple instruction, a quiet acknowledgement before each person continues on their way. Years of routine have made these exchanges almost invisible. Walking beside one of the inner courtyards, you notice an elderly eunuch pausing near the marble fountain. For a brief moment, there is no duty demanding his attention. He watches the sunlight ripple across the water while birds settle among the orange trees overhead. His face reveals little, yet you cannot help wondering how many decades he has spent inside these same walls. How many sultans has he served? How many frightened newcomers has he quietly guided through unfamiliar corridors? How many secrets has he carried without ever speaking them aloud? History seldom records such answers. The palace itself keeps many of them. The eunuchs also acted as trusted messengers. Letters from the Valide Sultan, requests from palace physicians, announcements concerning ceremonies. Every message traveled through carefully controlled channels designed to preserve both security and discretion. Trust was everything. A single careless mistake could damage reputations or disrupt the delicate order of the household. For that reason, advancement among the eunuchs depended upon reliability far more than ambition. Those who served faithfully for many years earned increasing responsibility. Some eventually managed vast charitable foundations established by members of the imperial family. Others supervised palace schools or religious endowments beyond the walls of Topkapi itself. Their influence quietly extended into the wider empire. As evening returns, the rhythm begins again. Oil lamps flicker beneath painted ceilings, doors close gently. The women of the harem retire to their chambers. Children fall asleep beneath embroidered blankets. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain continues its endless song. And at every important doorway, a watchful figure remains, not as a character from legend, not as a silent shadow from exaggerated tales, but as a man whose entire life has become part of the invisible machinery that allows this hidden world to function with remarkable order. For while the women shaped the life within the harem, it was these patient guardians who ensured that its carefully protected boundaries remained undisturbed until another dawn arrived. The quiet footsteps of the palace guardians disappear into the distance. Another morning arrives over Topkapi Palace, carrying with it the familiar sounds of fountains, distant prayers, and the soft movement of servants beginning their daily tasks. The imperial harem awakens slowly, wrapped in the same peaceful rhythm that has existed for generations, yet beneath the calm surface, another invisible world is always moving. A glance held a moment too long, a conversation that ends when someone enters the room, a gift delivered unexpectedly, a name mentioned more often than before. Inside the harem, attention itself could become a form of power. And whenever the sultan's favor turned toward a particular woman, everyone noticed. The idea of rivalry inside the imperial harem has often been exaggerated by stories that imagined endless dramatic conflicts. The reality was usually much quieter. Competition did exist, but it rarely appeared through open confrontation. In a world where reputation mattered deeply, ambition often moved through patience, careful friendships, and subtle choices. A woman's position could change because of a single moment, a successful conversation, the birth of a child, a recommendation from an influential figure, a display of intelligence or grace at the right time. For those closest to the sultan, every interaction carried meaning. Imagine entering a private garden within the palace. The afternoon sun rests gently upon the leaves of orange trees. A fountain creates a soft curtain of sound nearby. Several women sit together beneath the shade, working on embroidery while exchanging polite conversation. To anyone passing by, it appears peaceful, but each woman understands the invisible currents flowing around them, who has been invited to a particular ceremony, who received a gift from the palace treasury, whose advice was recently requested, whose son has attracted the attention of important officials. These questions are rarely spoken aloud. They do not need to be. Everyone understands their importance. A woman who became favored by the Sultan could receive greater privileges, a more comfortable residence, increased respect, and eventually a stronger position within the palace hierarchy. But favor was never guaranteed to last forever. The court changed constantly. A new arrival could attract attention, a political situation could shift, a woman's influence could rise slowly or disappear almost overnight. Because of this uncertainty, many women built their security through relationships rather than relying only on personal affection from the Sultan. Friendships mattered, alliances mattered, trust mattered. A senior woman might support a younger resident because she recognized intelligence and potential. Another might strengthen her connection with palace officials who could protect her interests. Mothers especially understood that the future of their children would determine their own position within the dynasty. The most famous examples of harem politics often involve women who became powerful through patience and intelligence rather than open struggle. One such figure was Valide Sultan, who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential women in Ottoman history. Her story demonstrates how the harem could become a place where education, personality, and political understanding created opportunities that few outsiders could imagine. Yet even extraordinary success came with challenges. Influence attracted attention, attention attracted suspicion. A woman who gained power could also gain enemies. Inside the palace, rumors traveled quietly, a whispered comment near a fountain, a private discussion behind a closed door, a carefully chosen phrase during a formal gathering. Words could travel farther than footsteps. Still, daily life continued. The women practiced music, they studied, they managed households, they cared for children, they embroidered delicate patterns into fabrics that might take months to complete. The rivalries existed alongside ordinary moments, not instead of them. This is what made the world of the imperial harem so complex. It was not a place where every person was constantly fighting. It was a place where everyone understood that their future depended upon navigating relationships carefully. As evening settles over the palace, lamps illuminate the private chambers once again. Somewhere, a young woman reads a letter from a distant friend. Somewhere else, another prepares clothing for an upcoming ceremony. In another room, a mother watches her sleeping child and quietly imagines what his future might become. The same walls contain all these lives at once: hope, uncertainty, ambition, patience. The Sultan's attention could open doors, but the women who understood the palace knew something deeper. True influence came not only from being noticed, it came from knowing what to do after the world began watching. The quiet chamber slowly fills with the first light of morning. Beyond the carved wooden screens, the gardens of Topkapi Palace awaken beneath a pale sky. Birds move among the branches of cypress trees, fountains begin their endless songs, and servants quietly prepare the household for another day. But inside one private room, the rhythm of life has changed forever. A newborn child sleeps peacefully beneath embroidered blankets. For a woman inside the imperial harem, motherhood could transform her entire existence. Before a child arrived, she might have been one among many. She might have studied, served, waited, and lived according to the routines established by generations before her. But the birth of a prince or princess created a new connection to the Ottoman dynasty itself. A mother was no longer simply part of the household, she became part of the future. In the Ottoman court, children represented more than family, they represented continuity. The survival of the dynasty depended upon the next generation, and the women who gave birth to those children gained a new position within the palace structure. Especially the mothers of princes. Imagine the moment when news begins traveling through the palace corridors. A child has been born. The announcement is not shouted through the halls. Instead, it moves quietly from one trusted person to another. A servant carries the message. An attendant bows before a senior woman. The information reaches those who understand its importance. The palace has welcomed a new life, yet everyone knows that this small child may one day carry the weight of an empire. The mother's world changes immediately. Her private apartments become more active. Experienced nurses and attendants surround her. Physicians visit regularly. Senior women offer advice passed down through generations. Every detail of the child's care receives careful attention. The mother watches closely. The first smile, the first steps, the first words, these simple moments are precious, but within the palace they also carry political meaning. A prince's education begins almost from childhood. He learns languages, he studies religion, government, military traditions, literature, and administration. His mother observes every stage. She chooses trusted attendants. She develops relationships with teachers and advisors. She understands that raising a future ruler requires far more than affection. It requires preparation. The bond between a prince and his mother often remained powerful throughout his life. Even after he left the private world of the harem to assume greater responsibilities, the influence of his earliest caregiver continued. The mother who once held his small hand while walking through palace gardens might later become one of his most trusted voices. This connection gave certain women remarkable influence. They knew their sons better than almost anyone else. They understood their personalities, fears, strengths, and weaknesses. They had witnessed their development long before ministers and generals ever met them. However, motherhood inside the Ottoman palace also carried deep uncertainty. A mother of a prince could experience great privilege, but she also understood the dangers surrounding succession. The Ottoman tradition of inheritance was complicated. Several princes could be raised within the same generation, and each represented a possible future ruler. Their mothers naturally hoped for their son's success, while understanding that the path ahead could be difficult. Behind the beauty of the palace gardens existed serious questions. Which prince would eventually rise? Which mother would gain greater influence? How would relationships change as children grew older? These questions followed families quietly through the years, yet daily motherhood remained filled with ordinary tenderness. A mother gently adjusts her child's clothing before a lesson. She listens as he struggles through his first words of Ottoman Turkish. She watches him fall asleep beside a small wooden toy. She remembers the child before the titles and responsibilities arrive. These moments rarely appear in official histories. Chronicles record victories, appointments, and political decisions. They rarely record a mother's quiet hand resting on her child's shoulder. But these private moments shaped the people who later shaped the empire. Within the walls of the imperial harem, motherhood was both intimate and powerful. It offered emotional connection in a world governed by rules. It offered influence in a place where position mattered. It created bonds that could survive decades of change. As evening settles over Topkapi Palace, the sounds of children slowly disappear from the courtyards. Lamps glow beside sleeping chambers, and mothers sit quietly beside their sons and daughters, watching over the future without knowing exactly what it will bring. For some, A child's first breath would become the beginning of extraordinary influence. For others, it would become a lifetime of hope, waiting behind palace walls. The palace gardens become quieter as the seasons slowly change. The same pathways where children once played now carry the gentle footsteps of women moving between lessons, chambers, and private conversations. The fountains continue their endless rhythm, and the marble walls hold the memories of countless lives that passed through these rooms. But within the imperial harem, one invisible force has always shaped relationships more than anything else: attention, the sultan's attention. In a world where hundreds of people lived beneath one roof, being noticed by the ruler could change the direction of a woman's entire life. A single conversation, a private audience, or a simple expression of approval could create opportunities that were impossible for others to reach. Yet attention was never as simple as affection. Inside the Ottoman palace, every personal relationship existed alongside questions of duty, tradition, and politics. The Sultan was not only a husband or father, he was the ruler of a vast empire. His choices affected families, officials, and the future balance of power throughout his territories. Because of this, the women closest to him often understood something important. A moment of favor was valuable, but influence required wisdom. Imagine a quiet evening inside the palace. The sun has disappeared behind the hills surrounding Istanbul. Oil lamps glow along the corridors, creating small pools of golden light across marble floors. Somewhere nearby, musicians quietly practice beneath a covered walkway while servants prepare the final arrangements for the night. Within one chamber, a woman carefully prepares for a meeting with the Sultan. There is no dramatic display, no exaggerated scene like the stories written by outsiders. Instead, preparation involves attention to detail. Her clothing is chosen carefully. Her words are considered. Her manner reflects years of training in palace etiquette. She understands that every gesture communicates something: confidence, respect, intelligence, grace. If a woman's ability to navigate these moments depended on far more than appearance. Conversation mattered. Understanding court customs mattered. Knowing when to speak and when to listen mattered. Many successful women in Ottoman history gained influence because they understood people, they remembered details, they built trust, they recognized opportunities. The Sultan's attention could arrive unexpectedly, perhaps during a celebration, perhaps after a recommendation from a trusted attendant. Perhaps through a conversation where a woman's intelligence became more noticeable than her beauty. Once attention was gained, maintaining it required careful balance. A woman who became too demanding could create resentment. A woman who remained completely silent might disappear from importance. The most successful learned how to remain present without appearing impatient. This was one of the great skills of palace life: patience. Throughout history, several women within the Ottoman court demonstrated remarkable ability in this area. They influenced decisions not through official titles, but through relationships carefully built over many years. One example was Kozum Sultan, who eventually became one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Her influence developed gradually, beginning with her relationship within the royal family before expanding into matters of state. Her story shows that the harem was not separated from politics, it was connected to it. The private and public worlds of the empire often overlapped. A conversation inside a palace chamber could eventually influence appointments, alliances, or charitable projects outside the walls. Still, daily life remained filled with ordinary moments: a woman waiting for a response to a letter, another practicing music before a gathering, a young attendant arranging flowers for a private room. Behind every political calculation were real people experiencing hope, uncertainty, excitement, and disappointment, the Sultan's attention was powerful. Precisely because it was limited, not everyone could receive it, not everyone could keep it, and everyone understood that circumstances could change. A woman might be admired one year and quietly forgotten the next. Another might spend years unnoticed before becoming one of the most influential figures in the empire. The palace rewarded patience in unexpected ways. As night deepens over Topkapi, the corridors become silent again. The lamps burn lower. The sounds of conversation disappear behind closed doors. Somewhere within the palace, a woman reads a message that could alter her future. Somewhere else, another accepts that her place will remain unchanged. Both continue living beneath the same roof. Both understand the same truth. In the imperial harem, attention was never merely attention. It was a delicate form of power, carried through glances, conversations, and moments that could quietly reshape a lifetime. The night air settles gently over Topkapi Palace, the fountains continue their quiet song beneath the stars, and the final traces of conversation disappear behind layers of carved wood and stone. From outside, the palace appears peaceful, almost untouched by the worries of the world beyond its walls, but inside the imperial harem, silence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes silence is where the most important decisions begin. A few softly spoken words, a carefully chosen friendship, a message carried by a trusted attendant. In a place where information was valuable, relationships became a form of protection. The women of the harem understood this better than anyone. Their lives depended on knowing who could be trusted, who held influence, and how events unfolding around them might affect their future. The word plot often creates images of dramatic confrontations and dangerous schemes. Yet the reality inside the Ottoman palace was usually much more subtle. Most political activity happened through conversation, persuasion, family connections, and carefully maintained alliances. Power rarely arrived loudly, it traveled quietly. Imagine walking through the harem during the early evening hours. The day's lessons have ended, the embroidery frames have been placed aside, the younger women have returned to their chambers, only a few lamps remain burning in the corridors, casting warm reflections across the tiled walls. In a small sitting room away from the busiest pathways, several senior women gather. There is no shouting, no obvious display of ambition. One pours tea into delicate cups, another examines a letter carefully before folding it again, a third listens more than she speaks. Their conversation may concern something simple, a household arrangement, a request from another department, or the education of a young prince, but within the palace, small matters can carry larger meanings, a recommendation for a teacher, an introduction between two families, a request delivered to the right person. Each decision strengthens certain relationships while weakening others. The harem functioned through networks. A young woman who arrived with no connections could gradually build them through loyalty and friendship. An experienced attendant might become a bridge between different groups within the palace. A mother of a prince could develop relationships with officials who would later support her child's position. Nothing existed separately, every relationship formed part of a larger web. Letters were especially important, because direct movement through the palace was controlled. Written messages allowed ideas and requests to travel carefully. Sealed papers passed through trusted hands, carrying information that might concern appointments, charitable projects, family matters, or personal concerns. A letter could be small enough to hold in one hand, yet its consequences could reach far beyond the room where it was written. The women who understood this world learned patience. They listened carefully before making decisions. They watched patterns. they remembered promises. A friendship formed years earlier might become valuable during an unexpected moment of uncertainty. An old connection could provide support when circumstances changed. This was one reason older women often possessed such influence. Time itself became a source of power. They had witnessed changing rulers, shifting alliances, and the rise and fall of many personalities within the palace. Their knowledge was not written in official records, but it guided countless decisions. Still, life inside these networks was not without emotional cost. Constant awareness could become exhausting. A careless statement might be misunderstood, a friendship might be questioned, a private conversation might become the subject of rumors. Trust was precious because it was difficult to find. One afternoon, a young woman sits beside a garden fountain, listening as an older attendant explains the importance of patience. The elder woman does not offer dramatic warnings. She simply describes the palace as a place where time reveals everything. People reveal themselves through repeated actions. Promises reveal their strength through difficult moments. Character appears when nobody is watching. The young woman listens carefully. She knows that someday she may need this wisdom. As years pass, some alliances become powerful enough to influence the direction of the empire itself. Women who once entered the palace as unknown newcomers may eventually advise rulers, support charitable works, or guide important decisions. Their influence does not come from force, it comes from understanding. As midnight approaches, the palace grows still. The last lamps remain burning beside the corridors. A servant carries one final message through the sleeping halls. A sealed letter disappears behind a wooden door, and somewhere within the quiet heart of Topkapi Palace, another relationship is being strengthened, not through grand gestures, but through the careful exchange of trust. The sealed letters disappear into the quiet corridors. The conversations held beside fountains slowly fade into memory, and another morning begins over Topkapi Palace. The same marble pathways that carried messages of influence now carry the smaller footsteps of children beginning their own journeys. Within the imperial harem, the future of the Ottoman Empire was not only discussed, it was raised. Long before a prince wore royal garments or stood before ministers, he was simply a child learning to walk through palace gardens, holding onto the hand of a trusted attendant. Behind the image of powerful rulers found in history books were years of childhood spent inside these walls. Years shaped by mothers, teachers, guardians, and traditions passed down through generations. A young prince's education began early. The palace understood that rulers were not born ready to govern. They had to be prepared. Imagine a quiet morning inside one of the prince's chambers. Sunlight enters through carved wooden screens, spreading soft patterns across the carpet. A small wooden writing board rests beside carefully arranged manuscripts. Nearby, a young boy sits patiently while his instructor explains the meaning of a difficult passage. The lesson moves slowly. There is no need for haste. Every word matters. The prince learns Ottoman Turkish, Arabic, and Persian literature. He studies religion, history, mathematics, poetry, administration, and the traditions of government. These subjects are not chosen simply to make him educated, they are meant to prepare him for responsibility. A future sultan must understand laws. He must recognize the needs of different communities. He must communicate with scholars, military leaders, diplomats, and ordinary people throughout a vast empire. But education is not limited to books. A prince also learns through observation. He watches ceremonies. He listens when experienced officials speak. He learns how decisions are made and how people respond to authority. His mother often remains one of his earliest and most important teachers. She introduces him to palace customs. She encourages discipline. She reminds him that royal status brings obligations as well as privilege. In the gardens, these lessons continue in quieter ways. A young prince walks beside his instructor beneath rows of cypress trees. He learns the names of plants growing within the palace grounds. He practices patience while observing craftsmen at work. He watches servants complete their duties and slowly begins to understand that an empire depends on countless people whose names may never appear in history. These small experiences shape his view of the world. Not every lesson takes place in a classroom. Sometimes the greatest lessons arrive through simple observation. The women who raise these children understand the importance of character. A prince may inherit a throne, but he must earn the loyalty of those who serve him. For this reason, discipline is emphasized from childhood. Respectful speech, careful listening, self-control, humility before knowledge. These qualities are repeatedly encouraged. Of course, palace life also contains moments of ordinary childhood. A child laughs while chasing birds across a courtyard. A toy falls beside a fountain and must be retrieved. A young prince complains about a difficult lesson before returning to his studies. The palace does not completely erase childhood, it simply surrounds it with expectation. As princes grow older, their world gradually expands. They spend more time with tutors and advisors. They begin studying military traditions and administration. Eventually, many are sent to govern provincial regions, gaining practical experience before any possibility of succession. This transition is both exciting and difficult. A child who once lived within the protected world of the harem must eventually step into the larger empire beyond the palace walls. For mothers, this moment carries mixed emotions: pride, hope, concern. They have spent years protecting and guiding their children. Now they must watch them enter a world where every decision carries consequences. One evening, a mother stands beside a palace window watching her grown son prepare for his departure. The gardens below are quiet. The same paths where he once played are now the paths he walks as a future leader. She remembers the child who struggled with his first letters, the child who reached for her hand during unfamiliar ceremonies, the child who slowly became someone the empire might one day depend upon. The imperial harem was often described as a place hidden away from the affairs of state, but in reality, it helped create the people who would shape those affairs. Behind every ruler was a childhood. Behind every command was years of learning, and behind many of the Ottoman Empire's most important figures stood the quiet influence of those who raised them. The footsteps of the young prince slowly disappear beyond the palace gates. The gardens remain exactly as they were. The fountains continue flowing. The cypress trees continue swaying in the breeze. The marble pathways still hold the warmth of the afternoon sun. Yet for those left behind inside the imperial harem, something feels different. A child who once filled the courtyard with laughter has entered another stage of life. A young woman who once dreamed of the world beyond the walls now watches the same walls become more familiar with every passing year. This was the hidden cost of life inside the Ottoman palace. Privilege brought comfort, but comfort could also create distance. The imperial harem offered beauty, education, protection, and opportunities that few women in the empire could imagine. Its residents lived among elegant gardens, skilled teachers, fine fabrics, and carefully prepared meals, yet they also lived within boundaries that could rarely be crossed. The walls that protected them from danger also separated them from ordinary life. Imagine standing beside one of the upper windows overlooking Istanbul. Below, the city moves freely. Merchants arrange their goods in crowded markets. Ships travel across the Bosphorus carrying travelers from distant lands. Families walk through streets filled with voices, music, and the smell of freshly baked bread. The world continues beyond the palace, but from this window, it feels very far away. A woman inside the harem might know the names of distant provinces, hear stories from travelers, and read letters describing places she would never visit. She could understand the empire, yet she could not freely experience it. This contrast shaped many lives behind the palace walls. The women were surrounded by luxury, but luxury could not replace freedom. Their days followed carefully organized schedules. Their movements were monitored. Their relationships were shaped by rank and circumstance. Even moments of relaxation existed within limits. A walk through the gardens required permission. A visit to another section of the palace followed rules. Communication with people outside the household passed through trusted channels. The palace was not a prison in the simple sense. Many women found companionship, education, and purpose there. Some gained remarkable influence. Some built respected lives after leaving the palace. Through marriage, some became powerful figures remembered centuries later, but the experience was different for everyone. For a young woman who arrived from a distant homeland, the passing years could bring both adaptation and loss. At first, everything unfamiliar felt overwhelming. Eventually, the palace became home, but home itself had changed. The language of childhood faded, old traditions became memories, the faces of relatives slowly disappeared from imagination. A woman might remember the sound of rain on the roof of her childhood home, the smell of a particular flower, or the voice of someone she had not heard in decades. These memories remained quietly protected inside her. One evening, an elderly woman sits beside a garden fountain, watching younger residents walk through the courtyard. She recognizes the nervous expressions of newcomers. She remembers carrying those same fears many years earlier. She remembers the first days when every corridor felt endless. Now those corridors are familiar. The palace has given her knowledge, respect, and security, but it has also taken moments she can never recover. History often focuses on the achievements of powerful women within the Ottoman court. It tells stories of influence, wealth, and political importance. Less often does it mention the quiet emotions behind those achievements. The loneliness of waiting, the uncertainty of the future, the simple desire to see a familiar place again. Even the most privileged lives contain invisible sacrifices. A woman may wear beautiful clothing, she may live in magnificent surroundings, she may have servants attending her needs, yet she may still miss walking freely through a village street, hearing a childhood language spoken around her, or sitting beside family members without ceremony separating them. As evening settles over Topkapi Palace, the lamps are lit one by one. Inside the chambers, women continue their routines. Books are opened, needles pass through fabric, children prepare for sleep, life continues. But beyond the walls, Istanbul remains awake. The city breathes, the ships move, the world changes, and within the quiet beauty of the imperial harem, hundreds of women live between two realities, a world of extraordinary privilege, and a world they can only watch from behind the windows. The palace rests beneath a quiet night sky. The same marble corridors that carried music, lessons, and gentle conversations during the day now feel different beneath the glow of scattered oil lamps. The fountains continue flowing peacefully, and the gardens remain beautiful. But every person inside the imperial harem understands something important. A place built on order depends upon obedience. Behind the elegance of Topkapi Palace existed a strict world where mistakes could carry consequences. The harmony of the household was carefully protected. and those who broke its rules faced correction, discipline, or the loss of privileges they had spent years earning. The imperial harem was not only a place of comfort. It was also a place of control, for hundreds of women, servants, and guardians living together in closed spaces. Rules were necessary. The palace contained people from different backgrounds, different languages, and different experiences. Without clear expectations, daily life could quickly become unstable, so discipline became part of the structure. Most punishments were not the dramatic scenes imagined by later storytellers. The reality was often quieter. A person might lose a position of trust, a privilege might be removed, a transfer to a less desirable duty might serve as a warning, a mistake could damage a reputation that had taken years to build. Inside the palace, reputation was one of the most valuable possessions anyone had. Imagine a young attendant walking through the corridors carrying a tray of carefully prepared gifts. She has been trusted with an important task. Her movements are careful, her expression is focused. She knows that everyone is watching, not because they wish for failure, but because palace responsibilities require precision. A single careless action could create embarrassment. A forgotten instruction could disappoint a senior figure. An inappropriate conversation could create rumors. In such an environment, awareness became a daily habit. The strictest rules often involved privacy and access. The imperial harem was designed around separation. Certain areas were reserved for specific people. Certain conversations were considered private. Certain movements required permission. The guardians of the harem existed partly to preserve these boundaries. A woman who entered the wrong area or ignored established customs could face consequences, not because the palace enjoyed punishment, but because the entire institution depended on controlled movement. The same discipline that restricted people also created stability. For senior women, maintaining order was a serious responsibility. The Valide Sultan and her representatives had to balance kindness with authority. Too much harshness could create resentment. Too much leniency could weaken the structure that protected everyone. Judgment required experience. An older attendant might sit with a young woman who had made a mistake, explaining what had gone wrong and why the rules existed. The conversation could be firm but patient. Many lessons were taught through correction rather than cruelty. However, fear still existed. Everyone inside the palace understood that their position was not guaranteed. A woman who had spent years building trust could lose it quickly. A servant who had earned responsibility could be replaced. A careless action could follow someone for the rest of their life. This uncertainty shaped behavior. People listened carefully. They watched their words. They considered their choices before acting. One evening, as rain falls softly against the palace windows, several young women sit quietly together after a difficult day. One of them has received a warning from a senior attendant. Her mistake was small, but the lesson remains clear. She understands now that palace life requires patience. An older woman beside her offers gentle advice. She explains that survival here does not depend only on talent or beauty. It depends on understanding the invisible rules surrounding every action. Years later, that same young woman may become one of the experienced members of the household, passing the same wisdom to someone new. The cycle continues. The palace teaches through repetition, through reward, through correction, through memory. As midnight approaches, the corridors become silent once again. The doors are closed, the lamps burn lower, the guardians continue their watch, the women return to their chambers, carrying with them the knowledge that beauty and power always exist beside responsibility, because within the imperial harem, the greatest challenge was not simply gaining a place inside those walls, it was learning how to remain there. The rain on the palace windows slowly fades, morning arrives gently over Topkapi Palace, leaving small drops of water resting on marble pathways and garden leaves. The air feels fresh, carrying the scent of wet stone, roses, and the distant waters of the Bosphorus. Inside the imperial harem, another day begins. For centuries, outsiders looked at these walls and imagined only secrecy. They saw a hidden household, a private world, a place separated from the great events of history. But behind these walls lived women whose choices reached far beyond the palace itself. Some influenced rulers. Some created charitable institutions. Some shaped the education of future leaders. Others quietly preserved traditions that allowed the empire to continue through generations of change. Their power rarely looked like the power of soldiers or ministers. They did not command armies on open fields. They did not sit on official thrones. Their influence moved through relationships, knowledge, patience, and understanding. It was a different kind of authority. One of the most remarkable examples was Valide Sultan. Her story began far from the center of Ottoman power. Like many women who entered the palace, her early life was shaped by circumstances beyond her control. Yet through intelligence, adaptability, and determination, she rose to become one of the most influential figures of the 16th century. Her influence was not built overnight. It developed through years of understanding palace life. She learned the customs of the court. She built relationships. She became someone whose opinions were valued. Inside the palace, influence often belonged to those who understood people better than anyone else. Another important figure was Valide Sultan. Living during a later period of Ottoman history, she became one of the most powerful women associated with the empire. Her influence extended beyond the private spaces of the harem into matters of government, especially during periods when young rulers required guidance. Her story reveals something important about Ottoman history. The harem was never completely separate from politics. The personal and political worlds constantly touched one another. A mother's advice to her son, a conversation between trusted advisors. A charitable project supported by a powerful woman. All these actions could shape the direction of society, but influence was not only measured through politics. Many women of the Ottoman court left their mark through architecture and charity. Imagine walking through Istanbul centuries later. You pass a fountain where travelers stop to drink. You see a school where children receive education. You enter a mosque complex surrounded by shops and public spaces. Behind these structures were often women of the imperial household who used their wealth to serve communities. Their names became connected not only with palace life, but with the physical landscape of the city itself. These projects reflected an important aspect of Ottoman tradition. Power carried responsibility. A person of influence was expected to contribute something lasting. A building, a foundation, a service for ordinary people, a gift that would remain long after their own lifetime. Inside the harem, younger women observed these examples carefully. They saw that their future did not depend only on personal circumstances. Knowledge mattered, character mattered, relationships mattered. The women who achieved lasting influence were often those who understood the world around them and recognized opportunities hidden inside ordinary moments. An older woman might teach a young newcomer how to write beautifully. A mother might guide her son through difficult decisions. A senior attendant might preserve traditions that had survived for generations. Each action contributed to the larger story. History often remembers the names of rulers. It records battles, treaties, and political changes. But behind many rulers stood people whose influence was quieter, women who shaped decisions before they reached official documents, women who prepared future leaders before they entered public life. Women who created spaces where communities could gather, learn, and pray. As evening returns to the palace, the gardens become peaceful once more. The women who once walked these paths are long gone. Their voices disappeared centuries ago. Their footsteps no longer echo across the marble floors, yet their presence remains, in the buildings they created, in the rulers they guided, in the traditions they protected. The imperial harem was not only a place where women lived, it was a place where generations were shaped, and among its quiet corridors were individuals who proved that influence does not always arrive with a crown. Sometimes it begins with a conversation, a lesson, a careful decision, or a hand gently guiding the future forward. The evening breeze moves gently through the palace gardens. The same pathways where mothers once guided their children now stand beneath the quiet light of the moon. The fountains continue their endless movement, and the marble walls of Topkapi Palace hold memories of countless conversations about one question that shaped the destiny of the Ottoman Empire: who would rule next? Succession. It was one of the most important concerns of the dynasty. For an empire stretching across vast territories, the arrival of a new sultan was never simply a family matter. It was a moment that could determine stability or uncertainty for millions of people, and within the imperial harem, the future of the throne was often being shaped long before the world outside knew anything about it. The women inside these walls understood this reality deeply. A prince was not merely a child, he represented possibility, a future ruler, a continuation of the dynasty. From his earliest years, everything surrounding him carried importance: his education, his companions, his advisors, his character, his health, his relationship with the people around him. A mother raising a prince was not only caring for her child. She was preparing someone who might one day carry the weight of an empire. Imagine a quiet morning inside the palace. A young prince walks through a courtyard with his teacher. His clothing is carefully arranged, but his expression is still that of a child. He stops beside a fountain, watching the water fall into a marble basin. The teacher speaks about patience, about justice, about the responsibility that comes with authority. The boy listens. Perhaps he does not yet understand the full meaning of these lessons, but they will remain with him years later. Those early teachings may influence decisions made from a throne. The relationship between mothers and sons became especially important because Ottoman princes often depended heavily on the guidance of their mothers during their early lives. A mother knew her son's personality better than anyone. She understood his strengths. She recognized his weaknesses. She knew when to encourage him and when to offer caution. This personal connection gave some women extraordinary influence. However, succession also created uncertainty. Several princes could exist within the same generation. Each represented a possible future. Each had supporters. Each had a mother who hoped for his success. This created a delicate atmosphere inside the palace. Ambition and affection existed together. Pride and anxiety existed together. A mother could celebrate her son's achievements while quietly worrying about the challenges ahead. The history of Ottoman succession was complex. Different periods followed different practices. Earlier centuries were shaped by intense competition between princes, while later reforms changed how succession worked. The famous system in which brothers could be killed after a new sultan came to power was intended by some rulers as a way to prevent civil conflict. Though it remains one of the most debated and painful aspects of Ottoman history, behind these decisions were real families, real mothers, real brothers. People living through difficult choices created by the demands of ruling such a vast empire. Inside the harem, these matters were not distant political theories, they were personal. A mother watching her son leave for provincial administration knew she might not see him often again. A young prince learning his duties understood that his future could change suddenly. A woman who had spent years raising a child knew that the empire might one day judge him. The emotional weight of succession followed everyone involved, yet the harem was not only a place of competition, it was also a place of preparation. Teachers educated future rulers, mothers guided their sons, experienced officials offered advice. Traditions were preserved and passed forward. The next sultan was not created on the day he received the throne. That journey began years earlier, in quiet rooms and peaceful gardens where children learned their first lessons. As night falls over Istanbul, the palace grows still. A young prince sleeps beneath embroidered blankets. His mother sits nearby, watching over him. At this moment, he is not a ruler, he is simply a child. But within the walls of the imperial harem, everyone understands that the future of an empire can begin with something as ordinary as a mother telling her son another story before sleep. The palace has grown older. The same marble corridors that once echoed with the footsteps of powerful women now carry a quieter rhythm. The fountains still flow. The gardens still bloom. The carved wooden doors still open and close beneath the watchful eyes of palace guardians. But something has changed. The world beyond the walls is no longer the same world that once surrounded the imperial harem. For centuries, the harem had been one of the most important centers of Ottoman court life. It was a place where families were formed, future rulers were raised, traditions were preserved, and influential women shaped the direction of the empire. Yet no institution remains untouched by time. The Ottoman Empire itself began experiencing profound changes. New political ideas emerged. New technologies transformed warfare and communication. European powers grew stronger. The old systems that had supported palace life slowly began to adapt, and eventually, many began to disappear. By the 19th century, the atmosphere of the imperial harem had changed greatly from its earlier centuries. The grand age of powerful Valide sultans and influential court women had passed. The empire was entering a period of reform. The world outside was moving faster. Imagine walking through Topkapi Palace during this later period. The courtyards remain beautiful. The tiles still shine beneath the sunlight. But the conversations have changed. Officials discuss modernization. Young members of the royal family hear about new schools, new institutions, and new methods of government. The empire is trying to survive in a rapidly changing world. The palace cannot remain frozen in the past. Eventually, the Ottoman rulers moved their main residence away from Topkapi Palace to newer European-style palaces along the Bosphorus, such as Dolmabahce Palace. These new residences reflected changing tastes and the desire to present the empire as modern and connected with the wider world. The imperial harem moved with them, but the meaning of the institution slowly changed. The old traditions became less central. The political influence once associated with certain women of the harem became more limited. The empire itself was becoming more bureaucratic. Government decisions increasingly depended on ministries, officials, and new administrative structures rather than the personal networks that had once surrounded the palace household. Still, the harem did not simply vanish overnight. Women continued to live within the royal household. Children were still raised, family traditions continued, daily routines remained. A mother still watched over her child. A teacher still guided young minds. An attendant still prepared clothing and organized household matters. Human experiences continued even as the larger world transformed. One of the most interesting aspects of this period is the contrast between old and new. Inside the palace, centuries of tradition remained visible. Outside, Istanbul changed around it. New buildings appeared, new forms of transportation arrived, new ideas about society and government spread throughout the empire. The younger generation of the Ottoman dynasty grew up in a world very different from their ancestors. They learned foreign languages, they studied new subjects, they interacted more openly with European culture. The palace itself reflected this transformation. Grand European-style halls stood alongside traditional Ottoman designs. Modern furniture appeared beside centuries-old decorations. The empire was trying to hold onto its identity while adapting to a changing age, but by the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire faced enormous challenges. Political instability increased, national movements grew stronger. The First World War brought devastating consequences. Eventually, the empire that had lasted for more than 6 centuries came to an end. In 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate was abolished, the royal family left Turkey, and the imperial harem as an active institution disappeared with it. The women who had once lived behind those famous walls entered a completely different chapter of life. Some remained connected to former royal families, others lived quietly away from public attention. Many carried memories of a world that no longer existed, a world of marble courtyards, private gardens, palace ceremonies, lessons beneath carved ceilings. As the sun sets over the old palace, it becomes easier to understand that the harem was never just about luxury or mystery. It was a reflection of the empire itself. When the empire was powerful, the harem represented stability, tradition, and influence. When the empire changed, the harem changed with it, and when the empire finally disappeared, the quiet rooms that had witnessed centuries of human stories became reminders of a vanished age. The fountains continued flowing, the gardens continued growing, but the voices that once filled those corridors became echoes of history. The final lamps of the old palace continue to glow softly. The night settles over Istanbul, covering the rooftops, gardens, and quiet courtyards of Topkapi Palace with a peaceful darkness. The voices that once filled these halls have faded into history, but the stones remain. They remember the footsteps of young women arriving from distant lands, uncertain of what their new lives would become. They remember mothers holding newborn princes who might one day rule an empire. They remember teachers guiding children through their first lessons. They remember powerful women making decisions that reached far beyond the palace walls. And they remember ordinary moments that history rarely records. A woman reading beside a window, an attendant arranging flowers in a quiet garden, a child laughing beside a fountain, a servant carrying a message through a candlelit corridor. These small moments were the true heartbeat of the imperial harem. For centuries, the word harem created images filled with mystery and imagination. Outsiders often viewed it through rumors and exaggerations, seeing only hidden rooms and distant stories. But behind the walls of the Ottoman palace was something far more human. It was a place where people lived, people with hopes, people with fears, people searching for meaning within the circumstances they were given. The women of the imperial harem lived in a world unlike any other. Some entered unwillingly, some found opportunities they could never have imagined elsewhere, some gained influence powerful enough to shape the future of an empire, others simply lived quiet lives, remembered only by the few who knew them personally. History often focuses on the names carved into monuments. Sultans, generals, statesmen, but the story of the Ottoman Empire also belonged to those whose voices were softer, the mothers who raised rulers, the teachers who shaped minds, the women who built charitable works, the attendants who preserved daily traditions, the guardians who protected the boundaries of palace life. Every empire is built not only through grand events, but through countless unseen actions. The imperial harem existed within a complicated reality. It contained beauty and restriction, comfort and isolation, opportunity and uncertainty. To understand it fully, we must hold all these truths together. It was neither the fantasy created by romantic stories nor the simple image of imprisonment created by some later descriptions. It was a human institution shaped by its time, a place where privilege and limitation existed side by side, a place where ordinary emotions continued beneath extraordinary circumstances. Imagine walking through Topkapi Palace today. The courtyards are peaceful, visitors move quietly across the same stones where generations once walked. The fountains still flow, the gardens still breathe with the changing seasons. The rooms are silent now, but they are not empty, they carry memories. A carved doorway remembers the people who passed through it. A faded tile remembers the hands that placed it centuries ago. A quiet garden remembers conversations that disappeared long ago. History does not always survive through written records. Sometimes it survives through places, through atmosphere, through the feeling that remains when we stand where others once stood. The imperial harem was a world hidden behind walls, but after centuries have passed, those walls no longer only separate. They invite us to look closer, to see the people behind the titles, to understand the lives behind the legends, and perhaps, as the palace sleeps beneath the stars, we can leave with one final thought. Every grand story in history is made from thousands of smaller stories. Some are remembered forever, some disappear quietly, but every one of them belonged to someone who once watched the sunrise, heard the evening bells, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. The fountains continue. Flowing in the darkness, the palace rests, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between history and memory, the voices of the Ottoman harem remained softly waiting to be heard.